Imagine waking up one morning to find that the streets outside your window are silent, eerily silent. No laughter of children echoing from the alleyways, no chatter from the nearby market, no rhythmic pulse of life that usually greets the day. Instead, there is only the sound of doors locking, blinds being drawn, and footsteps hurrying away from each other. You step outside, but everyone averts their eyes, as though acknowledging your existence might invite danger. The air is heavy, not with smoke or disease, but with something more invisible, more insidious, fear. And here's the unsettling thought. What if this is not an imagined world, but a mirror of the one we already live in? What if the silence is simply disguised by noise, and the walls we believe are built for safety are nothing more than monuments to our collective dread? Fear has always been with us. It crouches in the corners of our psyche, whispering survival's ancient language: run, hide, obey, conform. It once kept us alive in the wilderness, alert to predators. But now, in the modern age of concrete and glass, where lions no longer stalk the village edge, fear has found new prey. It hunts us. It infiltrates our politics, shapes our morality, dictates our relationships, and even chooses the very thoughts we allow ourselves to think. Have you noticed it? That subtle, invisible hand guiding your choices. The hesitation before speaking your mind in a crowd. The quiet compromise in your voice when authority looms too close. The way advertisements, news channels, and social media feed not only on your attention but on your anxiety, stretching your nerves taut like a bowstring ready to snap. And yet, here is the paradox that haunts us. Fear is both prison and protector. It keeps us alive, but it also keeps us from living. Without fear, society might crumble into chaos, but with too much fear, it calcifies into a brittle shell where creativity, authenticity, and truth cannot breathe. Which, then, is worse, chaos without fear, or order built on it? This is not just a personal dilemma. It is the very architecture of society. Look around. Governments rise and fall on the back of fear. Wars ignite not only from ambition, but from the terror of being conquered. Whole economies thrive by convincing you that without buying, subscribing, upgrading, you will fall behind, become irrelevant, or be forgotten. Even our morality is shaped by fear, the fear of judgment, of punishment, of exclusion. But here's the deeper, more unsettling question. If fear is the foundation of the world you live in, then whose world are you actually living in? Yours, or the one designed by those who know how to pull the strings of your dread? Consider how often you act not out of desire, but out of avoidance. You choose the safe career because you fear failure. You silence your true opinions because you fear rejection. You follow customs and traditions, not because they resonate with your soul, but because stepping outside of them feels like social death. Fear shapes not just society, it shapes the very contours of your identity. And what is identity, if not the collection of choices you've made under the weight of fear? The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once described anxiety as the dizziness of freedom, the vertigo that comes from standing at the edge of possibility. But fear takes this dizziness and shackles it, turning freedom into illusion. The cage has no visible bars, yet it confines you all the same. So we must ask, is fear the greatest lie we've inherited, or the most necessary truth? If fear has become the hidden architect of our world, then what happens when we begin to see the blueprint? Imagine, for a moment, a society not built on fear. What would it look like? Would people still obey laws? Would communities still hold together? Or would everything collapse without that binding thread of anxiety and caution? The great question emerges: do we fear because the world is dangerous, or is the world dangerous because we fear? And perhaps more disturbingly, if fear has become the very engine of society, then what would it take for you, right now, to step outside of it? As we move forward, we will peel back the layers of this invisible force, tracing its roots in psychology, philosophy, and the deep recesses of human history. But for now, let the silence linger. Let the question burn. Because the moment you begin to notice how fear has shaped not only society, but your own life, you can never unsee it. Fear, by itself, is not the enemy. It is ancient, coded into your nervous system long before you learned to speak, to walk, to reason. In evolutionary terms, fear was the flame that illuminated danger, the rustle of grass that could mean a predator, the hiss of wind that warned of a storm. It sharpened your senses, quickened your pulse, prepared you for survival. But evolution is a trickster. What once saved us has grown into a subtle tyrant. Fear has not left us, it has adapted. And now, in the absence of predators, it preys on us in new and invisible ways. Carl Jung observed that what we repress does not disappear. It buries itself deeper, lurking in the unconscious until it shapes our thoughts and behaviors from the shadows. Fear works precisely in this way. We rarely name it directly. Instead, we disguise it as responsibility, caution, prudence. We build lives that look stable, but underneath, the foundation is trembling. Every choice, from the career path you follow to the opinions you dare not voice, is nudged by this hidden guest sitting silently in the back of your mind. But why has fear taken such a central role in society? Perhaps because, as Nietzsche suggested, human beings are creatures in search of meaning, yet terrified of what true freedom demands. We want safety more than truth. We crave certainty more than authenticity. And so, leaders, institutions, and even families exploit this desire. They whisper the same message into your ears. The world is dangerous. Stay where you are. Do not question. Do not wander too far. Arthur Schopenhauer went further, describing life itself as a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom. Fear amplifies both extremes. Fear of suffering makes us cling to safety, while fear of emptiness drives us to distraction. Look at modern life. How much of it is built on this pendulum? Endless work schedules driven by the fear of poverty, followed by shallow entertainment designed to soothe the fear of meaninglessness. Fear, at every step, is the fuel. Psychology offers its own explanations. Consider the amygdala, the almond-shaped cluster in the brain that processes fear. In moments of danger, it floods your body with signals, adrenaline, cortisol, the fight-or-flight response. But in the modern world, this mechanism is triggered not by predators but by deadlines, criticism, political headlines, or social rejection. Your body reacts to an unkind email the same way it once reacted to a predator's growl. Stress becomes chronic, and fear becomes normalized. The danger is no longer external, it is internal, lodged into your very physiology. Yet society has learned to weaponize this. News outlets thrive on fear, amplifying threats so that you keep watching. Advertisers thrive on fear, suggesting that without their product you will be undesirable, unsafe, forgotten. Politicians thrive on fear, promising protection from enemies both real and imagined. Fear is the most profitable currency of modern civilization. It does not need to be solved. It needs only to be managed, recycled, amplified, and sold back to you. Think of how religions throughout history have wielded fear, not always maliciously, but effectively. The fear of divine punishment, the fear of eternal suffering, the fear of exile from the tribe. Jean-Paul Sartre described freedom as a burden too heavy for many to carry. Rules and dogmas, infused with fear, lighten that burden. They tell you, do this, avoid that, and you will be safe. In this sense, fear becomes not merely an emotion but the scaffolding of social order. But here lies the hidden problem. What begins as survival becomes domination. You are no longer just afraid of dying. You are afraid of living wrongly. You are afraid of shame, of standing out, of being misunderstood. Fear metastasizes into identity itself. You become careful in how you dress, cautious in what you post online, hesitant in your laughter, selective in your dreams. Slowly, fear sculpts you into someone smaller than who you were meant to be. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps, wrote that the last of human freedoms is the ability to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. Yet even he acknowledged how fear can crush this freedom. When stripped of everything, humans reveal their essence, not only courage, but also submission, cruelty, cowardice, all born from fear. Frankl saw how fear could turn men into shadows of themselves, but also how transcending fear could awaken a profound sense of purpose. This duality is crucial. Fear is not always the villain. It teaches, warns, protects. But left unchecked, it colonizes the mind. Imagine living in a house where every room has a hidden alarm, some triggered by rejection, others by failure, still others by loneliness. You tiptoe through your own life, careful not to set anything off. Is this safety, or is it captivity? And so we arrive at the paradox that society never wants us to resolve. Fear is necessary enough to obey, but destructive enough to keep us dependent. If the individual broke free of fear, the entire system, economic, political, cultural, would tremble. The hidden problem, then, is not simply that fear exists, but that it has been woven so seamlessly into the very fabric of human civilization that we mistake it for reality itself. Ask yourself, how many of your decisions are truly yours? How many are echoes of your parents' fears, your teachers' warnings, your leaders' anxieties? How often do you confuse comfort with freedom, or obedience with safety? Perhaps fear's greatest trick is not that it terrifies us, but that it convinces us it is indispensable. And if fear is indispensable, then what does it mean to rebel against it? The answer is not yet clear. But one thing is certain: the roots of fear run deeper than we imagine, into the unconscious, into our institutions, into the myths we pass from generation to generation. To face it is not merely to confront an emotion. It is to question the very foundations of the society around you and the person you have become within it. And if those foundations are trembling, what, then, will remain standing when the walls of fear finally crack? Fear rarely announces itself openly. It doesn't knock on your door, declaring, "I'm here to control you." Instead, it creeps quietly into your routines, your relationships, your collective identity. Its consequences are often invisible because they masquerade as normal. We live in fear, yet we call it discipline. We surrender to fear, yet we call it tradition. We act under fear's weight, yet we call it wisdom. But peel back the surface, and the hidden consequences are staggering. On a personal level, fear narrows the field of vision. Neuroscience shows that when the brain is in a state of fear, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for higher reasoning and creativity, goes dim. The amygdala hijacks the system, flooding the body with fight-or-flight chemicals. You stop thinking expansively and start thinking defensively. Imagine humanity as an orchestra, capable of symphonies of imagination, yet playing only a single repetitive note: survive, survive, survive. Fear reduces possibility into a tunnel. Inside this tunnel, your choices shrink, your voice trembles, and your life becomes a script written not by your desires but by your anxieties. Now extend this narrowing of vision across an entire society. What does it produce? A population that does not dream boldly, but merely survives obediently. Creativity withers under the weight of "what if I fail?" Communities fracture under the whisper of "what if they are different from us?" Democracy itself decays when citizens, overwhelmed by threats real or manufactured, willingly exchange freedom for the illusion of safety. History has shown this repeatedly. Societies surrender their liberties not in times of calm, but in times of fear. Consider the politics of fear. When a society is frightened, it becomes pliable. Leaders can present themselves as saviors, pointing to enemies, immigrants, outsiders, rebels, or even abstract dangers like corruption or terror. People rally not because they trust, but because they fear. And once fear sets the terms, truth becomes secondary. Propaganda thrives in fearful soil. Lies do not need to be persuasive. They only need to confirm the anxieties people already feel. Fear makes us crave certainty, even if that certainty is false. The unseen consequence. A society where truth is malleable and justice is negotiable. All that matters is safety. And in this pursuit of safety, cruelty becomes justified. Wars are launched for protection. Freedoms are curtailed for security. Voices are silenced for harmony. Fear reshapes morality, turning compassion into suspicion and neighbor into threat. But fear's grip is not only political, it is cultural, woven into our daily lives. Think of the relentless pressure to conform. From childhood, you are warned: don't speak too loudly, don't wear that, don't say this, don't believe that. Beneath these instructions is a single message: blend in or risk exile. Fear polices authenticity. It tells the artist to settle for safe designs, the writer to avoid dangerous truths, the dreamer to shrink their ambitions into manageable boxes. Society thrives on this self-censorship because a population that fears rejection will never challenge the status quo. And here is the bitter irony: the very conformity bred by fear breeds stagnation. Fear-driven societies become rigid, brittle, incapable of adapting to change. History is littered with civilizations that collapsed not because of external enemies but because they strangled themselves with fear. They silenced their innovators, punished their visionaries, and clung to tradition until the world moved on without them. Even at the level of intimacy, fear leaves its fingerprints. Relationships born out of fear of loneliness become prisons of dependency. Families guided by fear of dishonor impose silence and shame rather than love. Friendships shaped by fear of honesty grow shallow, unable to withstand vulnerability. Fear masquerades as care, but it is only control in disguise. And in this control, the deepest consequence unfolds: the slow erosion of trust. Trust is fragile. It requires openness, risk, vulnerability. Fear poisons all three. When fear dominates a society, neighbors become competitors, colleagues become threats, strangers become enemies. Suspicion spreads like a contagion. Communities fracture not with explosions, but with quiet withdrawals, locked doors, hushed voices, walls that grow higher every year. The irony is cruel. In trying to protect ourselves from danger, we create the very isolation that endangers us most. Fear promises safety, but its consequence is loneliness. And loneliness, modern psychology shows us, is as lethal as any disease. It corrodes health, shortens life expectancy, and leaves individuals vulnerable to manipulation. What better way to control a population than to keep them isolated in their fear? But perhaps the deepest unseen consequence of all is existential. When fear governs your life, you lose sight of who you are. You become a role, a mask, a survival strategy. Jean-Paul Sartre warned of bad faith, the act of lying to oneself in order to escape the terror of freedom. Fear is the engine of bad faith. Every system of control survives by convincing you that rebellion is impossible. Fear whispers, if you resist, you will be crushed. If you step out of line, you will be alone. And so you stay in the cage, not because the bars are unbreakable, but because you believe they are. Yet history, psychology, and philosophy all tell us the same secret. Rebellion begins not with armies, but with the courage of a single mind that refuses to obey. To break free from fear is not to become fearless. That is a myth. Even the bravest warriors, the most enlightened sages, the most defiant revolutionaries carried fear within them. The difference lies not in erasing fear, but in reorienting your relationship to it. Fear thrives when it is unconscious, when it moves you without your awareness. The first act of rebellion, then, is to notice. To say, yes, I feel afraid. But fear is not mere. It is only a visitor in my house. Consider the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. They lived in an empire of power and cruelty, where exile or execution could come at any moment. And yet their writings pulse with serenity. Why? Because they understood that fear is fed by attachment to what we cannot control. Rebellion begins by reclaiming the inner realm. I cannot control death, but I can control how I meet it. I cannot control rejection, but I can control my authenticity. I cannot control fear itself, but I can refuse to kneel before it. This shift sounds simple, yet it is radical. Imagine a society where individuals no longer obey fear blindly. What would propaganda do in such a world? What power would authority hold over citizens who no longer tremble at threats? Fear loses its grip the moment it is exposed for what it is, a manipulator, not a truth teller. But rebellion is not only philosophical, it is deeply practical. It requires small acts of defiance in daily life. Speaking the truth even when your voice shakes. Choosing the path that excites your soul even when it risks failure. Reaching for connection when fear tells you to retreat. Each act is a spark, and sparks spread. One person who lives authentically challenges the conformity of 100 others. One voice that speaks honestly gives permission for others to do the same. Think of historical figures who dared this rebellion. Rosa Parks, who refused to surrender her seat, breaking the unwritten law of fear that upheld segregation. Galileo Galilei, who defied religious dogma to speak of the stars, knowing the danger it would bring. Nelson Mandela, who endured decades in prison, yet emerged not broken by fear, but radiant with courage. These were not people without fear. They were people who refused to be owned by it. Their rebellion was contagious. It rippled outward, reshaping societies. On a psychological level, rebellion also means confronting the shadow. Jung wrote of the shadow as the disowned parts of ourselves, the fears, desires, and instincts we repress. To break free from fear, we must integrate the shadow, bringing it into consciousness. What is it you fear most? Rejection, failure, mortality. Until you turn and face it, fear will always pull the strings from behind the curtain. But when you stare into the abyss loses some of its power. Fear shrinks in the light of awareness. Yet rebellion is not only an inner transformation, it is also collective. No one escapes fear alone. Societies built on fear can only be dismantled when individuals unite. Courage multiplies in community. When people gather and speak truth together, the fear of exile dissolves. When creativity is shared, the fear of failure lessens. When love is practiced, the fear of loneliness weakens. Rebellion is not the loud chaos of riots alone. It is also the quiet revolution of trust, solidarity, and shared authenticity. There comes a moment in every confrontation with fear when you realize something startling. The enemy was never outside of you. The governments, the institutions, the traditions, the voices, they all wield fear, yes, but only because you allowed it. Fear survives not because it is invincible, but because you believed it was essential. And this leads to the most unsettling, liberating realization of all. Fear is not reality, it is a lens. Imagine standing before a vast landscape, mountains stretching endlessly, rivers winding like veins of silver. Now imagine putting on a pair of dark, distorted glasses. Through them, the mountains appear monstrous, the rivers treacherous, the horizon unreachable. If you never removed the glasses, you would swear the world was hostile. You would build walls, carry weapons, and live small. But the truth? The mountains were magnificent, the rivers nourishing, the horizon limitless. Fear is the lens that distorts. Take it off, and the world changes, not because the world changed, but because you did. This is the ultimate truth. Fear has power only as long as you mistake it for truth. Once you recognize it as perception, not reality, it collapses. The tiger in the mind may roar louder than the tiger in the jungle, but it cannot bite unless you let it. And here is the paradox that shakes the foundations of society. The moment individuals see fear for what it is, the structures built upon it begin to crumble. Political propaganda falters when citizens no longer tremble. Advertising loses its grip when consumers no longer believe they are inadequate. Cultural conformity cracks when people no longer fear exclusion. Entire systems of control, carefully maintained for centuries, stand vulnerable to collapse when the illusion of fear dissolves. But the truth runs deeper still. Beneath fear lies something ancient, something more powerful than any cage. What is it? Freedom, yes, but also love. Every time you peel away fear, what remains is connection. To yourself, to others, to life itself. Fear isolates, love unites. Fear constricts, love expands. Fear enslaves, love liberates. And yet, most societies have chosen fear as their foundation because it is easier to control people who are afraid than people who are free to love. Viktor Frankl, standing in the abyss of Auschwitz, discovered this truth. Everything could be taken from him, food, freedom, dignity, except one thing, the freedom to choose his response. And in choosing love over fear, even in the face of death, he became more powerful than his captors. That is the ultimate rebellion. That is the ultimate truth. But what does this mean for you? It means that every moment of fear is also an invitation. When you feel afraid of rejection, it is a doorway to authenticity. When you fear failure, it is a summons to creativity. When you fear death itself, it is a reminder to live fully. Fear is not the end of freedom. It is the threshold. Cross it, and you step into life unshackled. Ask yourself, what would you do if fear were not your master? What truths would you speak? What risks would you take? What life would you create? The answers are not fantasies, they are maps. They point you toward the life that is already possible, if only you dare to lift the lens. And here is the final, most powerful realization. Society itself is only the sum of individuals. If you change your relationship to fear, you do not only free yourself, you shift the world. Every act of courage sends ripples outward. Every refusal to bow before fear plants a seed of freedom in another. Fear builds societies of control, but courage builds societies of possibility. So perhaps the real question is not, how does fear shape society? But rather, how will your freedom reshape it? Picture it. A society where children are taught not to obey blindly, but to question bravely. A society where leaders cannot manipulate with fear because citizens see through the illusion. A society where differences are celebrated, not feared. A society where death is not denied, but embraced as part of life, fueling the urgency to live deeply. That world is not a utopia, it is a possibility. And it begins the moment one person dares to see fear for what it is, a shadow, not a master. The ultimate truth is that fear is not here to destroy you, it is here to awaken you. It stands as a gatekeeper to freedom, demanding that you confront it, understand it, and walk through it. Beyond the gate lies the life you were meant to live, not small, not safe, not obedient, but vast, authentic, and free. And so the question lingers, no longer as a haunting, but as a challenge. Will you let fear continue to shape the society around you, or will you dare to shape a new one, built not on dread, but on courage, truth, and love? The silence you heard at the beginning of this journey, the silence of locked doors, hushed voices, and shuttered windows, it does not have to be the silence of fear. It can be the silence of dawn, the hush before a new day begins. And in that silence, perhaps, you will hear it, the sound of your own courage rising, ready to shape a world unbound.